Warhammer 40k has a lot of bad things about it, but one of the things that have always made it interesting to me is its variety of different societies and cultures. The grim darkness of the far future is filled with a lot of awful people, but awful people come in many shapes and sizes. We've got horrible, hypocritical bureaucrats in the form of the Adeptus Administratum. We've got a society obsessed with fame and fortune in the form of the Toe Empire. And we've also got genocidal zealots in the form of the Imperium's many different holy orders. But amongst all of these, perhaps the most interesting example of a horrifying society is that of the Orks. Now, if you haven't heard of Warhammer before, the Orks are a race of green-skinned humanoids who are united by a sort of hive-mind psychic network which motivates them to do nothing but fight wars. They live for battle, and they're willing to do anything to get more of it. But why is that? What makes a society like this even possible? And is there any way to make sense of a culture based entirely around warfare? To answer this question, we're going to have to talk about the WAAAGH. Now, if you know anything about orcs, then you probably already know about the WAAAGH because it's basically their whole thing. Every so often, the psychic network that links all orcs together generates a powerful psychic signal that drives all nearby greenskins insane with a lust for battle. This is what prompts the formation of a WAAAGH, a great horde of greenskins that marches across the galaxy in search of a good fight. It's not a formal military campaign led by a warlike aristocracy or a mercantile expedition meant to gather resources for a central authority. It's just a bunch of greenskins going nuts because they feel itchy for a scrap. There's no real way to know where a WAAAGH will pop up next or how strong it'll be. But one thing's for sure, wherever they go, they bring only destruction and death. There's really no nice way to put this, but orcs are kind of terrible. Their entire culture is predicated on needless violence and war, and if that sounds a bit extreme, consider that even their artistic expression consists of violent imagery depicting conquest and slaughter. Even their religion revolves around a pantheon of dead warlords whose only accomplishments were their martial prowess and strategic brilliance. So you might be wondering how you can possibly justify a video about why Orky society is good. After all, if orcs are terrible, then so is their society. Well, here's the thing, I don't actually think Orky society is good, at least not by normal standards. That's why I framed this video in terms of ethics rather than morality. I'm not saying that orcs are good people, they are absolutely terrible, but it is possible to analyze their culture through an ethical lens without making any claims about whether or not it's right or wrong. For example, one of the first things you'll notice about Orky society is that it's completely egalitarian. There are no social classes amongst orcs. Everyone is equal. This is partly due to the nature of their society, which lacks any sort of formal organization, but it's also reinforced by their belief in the WAAAGH and the idea that every orc has the potential to become a great hero. One particularly fascinating aspect of this egalitarianism is that it extends to gender as well. While most of the orcs we see are male, female orcs are much more common than in most other species of the Warhammer universe. Female orcs aren't treated as property or chattel. They're free to do as they please, which in practice means they usually end up working as either healers or prostitutes. Both of these roles are generally considered beneath the standard battle-oriented orcs, but there's no stigma against females participating in combat either. If she wants to grab a shooter and get stuck into the enemy, then by all means, go ahead. She's an equal member of society after all, unlike the women of, say, the Dark Eldar or the Genestealer cults. But while Orky egalitarianism might sound progressive by human standards, it doesn't necessarily translate into actual freedom. For the individual orc, life is still pretty restrictive. After all, their entire lives are devoted to the WAAAGH, and anyone who doesn't participate risks being outcast from orc society and left to die. There's also the fact that while orcs can be incredibly inventive when it comes to technology, their culture does not encourage innovation. Technology is primarily seen as a tool for war, and the best technology is often just whatever big gun you happen to have looted off some unfortunate enemy. Individual initiative is a good way to get gorked out by your war boss. So unless you're independently wealthy enough to fund your own warband or lucky enough to be in charge of your own ship, chances are you're going to be spending your life doing exactly what your boss tells you to. This lack of personal freedom is taken to its logical extreme during a WAAAGH, when every single decision is made for the average orc by the war boss. The very concept of personal choice is alien to the mentality of a typical green skin. Now, this might sound pretty bad, and it definitely is, but remember, we're talking about ethics, not morals. You could argue that the orcs' lack of freedom is simply part of the evolutionary process that led to the creation of their hive mind, which itself is the ultimate source of the WAAAGH. In a way, the WAAAGH is a sort of hive mind writ large, a psychic manifestation of the collective will of countless millions of orcs across the galaxy. Through the WAAAGH, orcs achieve a kind of higher unity, a psychic communion with countless members of their species all at once. In fact, the WAAAGH is the only way orcs can really connect with each other on a meaningful level. Due to the nature of their hive mind, orcs can never really interact with each other as individuals. All an orc ever knows is the hive mind, its thoughts, emotions, and memories. It's the only reality they've ever known, and it's all they've ever had. But while the hive mind provides orcs with comfort and companionship, it also makes them incredibly vulnerable. As we discussed in our last video, orcs are basically psychic auto-destruct helmets. If the psychic link between orcs was severed, then every single one would instantly explode. And that means that any attempt to reform orc society outside the WAAAGH would likely result in the deaths of billions. With that kind of doomsday scenario looming over them at all times, it's easy to see why the WAAAGH would be so appealing to the orcs. Of course, appealing and right are two completely different things. There are plenty of human dictatorships that might be appealing in that they offer stability, security, and purpose, but that doesn't make them any less terrible. The WAAAGH is arguably one of the worst things that could happen to a species, but it's also a necessary evil for the orcs. The alternative would be total annihilation, so in that sense it's the lesser of two evils. Ultimately, there's really no way to reconcile the WAAAGH with human notions of ethics. It's deeply disturbing and horrifying, but it's also necessary. The fact is that the vast majority of orcs will never lead a happy, fulfilling life by human standards. They're born into a hive mind, and they'll spend their entire lives fighting wars, pillaging on helpless settlements and looting valuable resources, all under the banner of a great and terrible WAAAGH. But for better or worse, this is simply the reality of their existence. To truly understand orc society, we must understand that the WAAAGH isn't just a war, it's a way of life. It's everything they've ever known and all they'll ever have. It's their home, their family, and their friends. And even though it's terrifying and morally reprehensible, it's also the only thing that keeps them alive.